Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang, currently sheltering in place in San Francisco. Markets mixed today. The S&P and the Dow closing down, the NASDAQ up, tech offsetting some of the declines. We are standing by now for the daily White House press conference. President Trump saying it should start any moment now. This as officials continue to weigh the toll of this public health crisis with the toll that it is taking on the American economy. The president tweeted earlier today that he alone has the power to reopen the economy, that it's not up to governors. This as New York's state death toll numbers are flat, but flat at a horrific level, according to Governor Andrew Cuomo, saying that earlier today. And unemployment numbers lie somewhere between the Great Recession and the Great Depression. Meantime, you've got Apple and Google, two tech rivals, teaming up in a massive project to help deliver contact tracing to Americans and people around the world. The companies would work together to notify users if they come into contact with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19. I want to bring in our Bloomberg News reporter, Mark Gurman, now, who covers Apple. Mark, you just got off a briefing call with Apple and Google. Still a lot of questions about how exactly this is going to work. Fill in some of the blanks for us.
Yeah, I guess one of the big questions people wanted to know was, when am I going to be notified? Am I going to be notified if I cross paths with someone on the street or in a grocery store? The answer is a little bit more fluid. This is going to be something that's going to be developed over time as we have more information. But one suggestion made on the call was if they're within the person's proximity of a couple feet for up to 10 minutes, that would allow them to notify them. Other questions had to do with if this could be used as a surveillance tool, which Apple and Google quickly shot down, saying personal information and location data is not collected in any central place.
So talk to us about the privacy and security concerns. You had lawmakers sending a letter to Apple after they announced this, curious about how this data is going to be used, what's going to be collected, who's going to be able to see this data, how long will it be held onto? Did they answer any of those questions, Mark?
Yeah, they answered a lot of the questions. The timeline of 14 days, which we've heard since the beginning of this pandemic in terms of how long this could be in a person's system, came up. It seems like once a person, passes through, they no longer have the coronavirus. They'll be out of the system. Apple said that this can be shut down at any time, hopefully when the pandemic ends. Sometime soon, Apple will be able to basically just remove the need to have this in its operating systems. They emphasized, them and Google, that this is an opt-in situation. There was a question about what if governments start requiring users to use this Apple and Google functionality, and they both quickly said that this system was designed for users to be opt-in, not for something that a government can uniformly require. So they're saying all the correct things about privacy. Apple hasn't seemed to really let us down on the privacy front. I think people are more concerned about Google. But Google was, talking the same language as Apple in terms of privacy. And, as of right now, I don't think there's any reason not to believe them. This is a global pandemic, and they're doing what they need to do for this situation.
Talk to us about some of the concerns that this could be left wide open to trolling. This could be hacked. This could be, people could lie and say they've tested positive for COVID-19, and actually they have not.
Yeah, that's, of course, Emily, the most pertinent question. And what Apple and Google said was there would be what they call a verification flow, which means some sort of system to verify that you actually were tested positively, unfortunately, for COVID-19. And they said that's part of the reason why these tools will be exclusive to official public health apps that they will be working with. They said they would be helping rapidly develop these applications for public health organizations across the world, both in the U.S., Europe, et cetera. And they said the flows will be handled through those applications. One suggestion was users who tested positively would have to verify this with the scan of a QR code via their smartphone camera. I'm sure there's other ways they can do it, but they said there will be a verification requirement for this.
So, Mark, what about the potential for false not positives in terms of the virus testing, but false positives in that you weren't necessarily exposed. Like if I'm walking past someone on the street, but we're keeping a safe distance, or I'm standing behind someone in a grocery line. also keeping a safe distance. Will the app be notifying a bunch of people when there isn't really a risk?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's really to be seen in terms of what a safe distance is and what number of feet and minutes of proximity the phone will sense. I still think that's still fluid. I think that's something that when this first launches in mid-May, it could be a certain period and a certain amount of feet. And by June or July, it could be a completely different range. So I think it'll have to do with that. And in terms of your question of false positives, I think that's just something we're going to have to face and deal with and see as time goes on. They said the Bluetooth Low Energy wireless technology that they're using is very precise. It can measure up to between 10 and 15 feet. They said this would be very specific to just a few feet away for a lengthy period of time. They gave an example of two people on a park bench talking next to each other about 2 feet away for a longer conversation. In that case, there is probably the chance that one of the people would be transferring coronavirus if they were positive for it to the other person, but less likely if they're walking, 10 feet away in a grocery store.
All right, Mark Gurvin, who covers Apple for us, thank you so much. We'll continue to look for updates as Apple and Google continue to work together on this technology, see which companies, which organizations, possibly the U.S. government, create an app that would work for this. Mark Gurvin for Bloomberg News, thank you so much. Now, earlier today, I sat down with Meg Whitman, the CEO of Quibi, also the former CEO of HP and eBay. Quibi, the short-form mobile content app that had 1.7 million downloads in its first week. They didn't expect to launch in the time of a pandemic, but the numbers are beating their expectations. Take a listen to what Whitman told me earlier today.
That's probably, roughly in the ballpark over time of break even. But our depends on the amount of watching. It depends on the advertising revenue and the split between advertiser-supported subscribers and non-advertiser-supported subscribers. But, listen, we're very focused on profitability, right? I mean, Emily, you've known me long enough to know that I ultimately know that revenues need to be greater than costs. Mm-hmm. And so we've got a very clear business plan that our investors have bought into. And after week one, we're on plan, but we got a long ways to go. It's early days.
So let's talk about the money then. It's free for the first 90 days. How many people are you, as a CEO who cares about the bottom line? How many do you actually expect will start paying for that?
We don't know because this is such an unusual time. You will recall the original idea was a 2-week free trial, remember? And then we thought because of COVID, we really wanted to give people a 90-day free trial if you sign up by the end of April. And so those folks won't roll to pay until July. So we won't know about this first cohort to July. But then if you signed up May 1st, you'll have a 2-week free trial. So we'll have insight into the roll to pay in mid-May. And it's hard to know. We just live in such an unusual environment that you just don't quite know. There's industry benchmarks, but who knows in this environment?
1.7 million downloads so far. You're going to get a lot of data on people, what they're watching. How do you plan to use that data?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is we laid out a privacy policy very early at Quibi. I wanted to be on the right side of history here, and we've had privacy, input into the building of our platform. So we don't sell and remarket any information. We only look at information on an anonymized basis. And then we will try to, say, okay, what are the segments and who's watching what? We know there'll be a segment of entertainment enthusiasts who love to watch everything, whether it's comedy or drama or daily essentials. We also know there's shows that, have more of a niche audience.
What position are you in when it comes to content? I know you had been finished shooting most of your shows, but, we're looking at broadcast networks, airing movies, the same movie over and over again. And what happens in the fall and they have no new content?
Yeah. So here's the good news for us is we knew we had to bank a lot of content because I thought maybe we would want to bring content forward. We also had anticipated that there would be a writer's strike in May. So we had a whole host of content up front. So for our movies and chapters, our unscripted and documentaries, we're good through November. Now then all the daily essentials is just like you every day, Emily. All our daily essentials have to be shot pretty much every day, with the exception of some of the talk shows like a Rachel Hollis or Shan Boudrin. But, so news, sports, weather, gaming news, celebrity news are all shot daily from people's homes, just exactly like you're doing it. And we had to pivot on this in 2 weeks. I mean, we realized on March 14th that this wasn't going to work. And so we had literally 2 weeks to get everyone reorganized, and our partners have been incredible. I mean, so entrepreneurial. I have my hats off to your industry. How you have pivoted this fast is remarkable.
More and more companies are having layoffs, huge layoffs. Yelp and Eventbrite cutting 25, 45% of their workforce, companies furloughing huge groups of employees. As somebody who ran HP, ran eBay, how much more of that do you think we're going to see?
Yeah, unfortunately, Emily, I think we're going to see more. The longer this goes on, I think the more impact it's going to have on our economy. And then, if you have no business, it's really hard for you to keep on, all those fixed costs. I mean, fortunately for us, this is a ramp up phase for us. So, our employee count is factored into our model. And as long as we remain on track, I think we feel really good about our ability to keep everyone working.
Quibi CEO Meg Whitman there. After the break, we'll tell you a bit more about what she had to say about the economy and how it's impacting her personal investing strategy. Also, we will take you to the White House. That daily White House briefing is scheduled to start any moment now. We will be there as soon as it begins. This is Bloomberg. Back now to my conversation with Quibi CEO Meg Whitman, who formerly ran HP and eBay. We talked to her a little bit about her investing strategy now. She's also been investing on the side in various startups. Take a listen to what she had to say about how the pandemic is impacting her strategy.
I've lived through 9/11. I've lived through the 2008 recession. This always comes back. And when you're an investor, you just need to hang in there and remain calm, because this always does come back. I mean, we're an investor, in professional sports. They're completely sidelined right now. We're an investor in esports. They're completely sidelined right now. And then, of course, have a broad portfolio. You just hunker down and say, this too will ultimately pass, and the economy will come back. I just can't tell you exactly when.
But do you think things will go back to normal? I mean, right now it's hard to even remember what normal was. This now seems normal. And so how do you figure out, or are you trying to figure out what changes, what stays the same, what is the new normal?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to predict, isn't it? And I suspect that the economy comes back, not slowly. I think it comes back much more rapidly than it did in 2008. You remember 2008, it went down and then sort of a long, slow climb out. I think when things, open up, you'll see a V shape to the recovery. And then, the question is, do people resume the way they used to live? And I think over time they do, but it may take a while.
Obviously, the crisis has changed how we're spending our money. We are shopping only online, but we're spending less money overall. Talk about the challenge ahead for an eBay, for an Amazon, and for the e-commerce business in general, given what we're facing here.
Well, e-commerce looks like a pretty good place to be right now, doesn't it? I mean, Amazon announced they were hiring 175,000 new workers, or some enormous number, with a $2 an hour pay raise. So I think e-commerce is the place to be right now, because everyone is buying online because they don't really want to leave their houses. Now, I think, again, when this comes back, that will probably, revert not all the way back to where land-based retail was, but certainly people will shop again in land-based retail, I suspect.
How do you think the entertainment industry looks different after this? I mean, do you think viewing habits will change as a result of sort of what we're seeing now, or is that something that, bounces back as well to the way things were?
Well, I think people will ultimately go back to movie theaters. I think people will, go back to work. But I do think the area that we have focused on, which are these in-between moments. You remember when we first talked about this, that the idea was you would watch Quibi on your in-between moments, on your commute, at a doctor's office. Of course, no one is doing any of those things. So our question was, would people watch during different in-between moments at home? And fascinating fact, our users are basically watching pretty much consistently between 7 in the morning and about 8 at night. And it's their in-between moments. So, in between interviews, in between a Zoom call, in between wrangling the kids, in between, cleaning up and doing whatever you need to do. And so people are actually have a shorter amount of time with which to consume content. And I think that will probably stay with us and maybe accelerate. And I think people will accelerate their watching of video on mobile devices as well. That's been a trend that's been in existence from since 2012, where it was just 6 minutes a day where you watched video on your phone, to now 60 minutes a day in 2018, maybe as high as 80 minutes a day in 2019. And I suspect that will continue.
And do you think, is the plan always mobile only? What if I want to get some amazing, incredibly well shot stuff on my television set and watch it after 8 p.m.?
So this was something that we thought we would bring to market in 6 months, because we never dreamed we were going to launch in the middle of a pandemic. And so I've just been, in fact, so finally I was just talking to my engineers about, okay, how fast could we do casting to your TV set? Because we've had a lot of users who've asked us to do that. It's quite an engineering lift. It's not easy, but the engineers are trying to think about how could we do this on an accelerated timescale, because I think it's exactly of the moment, and we've had a number of requests for it. So you're dead on there.
Quibi CEO Meg Whitman there. Coming up, talking to the CEO of Redfin. Imagine showing a home or touring a home in the time of the coronavirus. We'll talk to you about the rise of the virtual home shopper as the housing market slows to a crawl. We'll also take you to that White House press briefing scheduled to start any moment now. As soon as that begins, we'll be there. This is Bloomberg. We're supposed to be heading into boom time for the housing market, but instead, the number of houses being pulled from the market is doubling. This, according to Redfin. Earlier, I spoke with Redfin CEO Glenn Kelman about the future of the housing market, what it means for the next 2, 3, 4 months, and how they're handling the crisis amid layoffs and furloughs.
The rate of delisted properties has doubled. The number of new listings is down 44%. Anybody who wanted to sell a house has left the market, and the only people who remain are the ones who have to sell a house. So distress creates demand in some ways. I used to feel that real estate wasn't an essential service, that people were just looking at pretty houses, but now the folks we're talking to have lost their jobs, they're in a jam, someone has gotten sick, and we're trying to help them out.
So how long do you estimate the housing market will be all but shut down? Does this go into summer, into fall?
Well, I think everyone's trying to guess when business will reopen for all of America. The housing market isn't completely shut down. It's down about 50%. So that's the decline in demand that we've seen. And again, the opportunists are gone, and really the people who have to move remain. And I think that's going to go through the summer.
Now, I know it's difficult to even do a home tour because of a quarantine. It's difficult to show a home. You guys have some technology to get around that. But does this turn it into a buyer's market, or is it nobody's market?
Well, I think it's probably a buyer's market. There's some vultures out there who have been sidelined by high housing prices for a long time, who are ready to pounce on deals. And the question is, can they even see the place? And so Redfin has had a video chat touring option for a long time. People left over it at one point because it was such a dismal failure. About 0.5% of home buyers would look at a home that way, and now it's about 33%. So the numbers are shooting through the roof. They're going up every week. And we see these new contingencies that say, I'm going to buy your house on one contingency, that I walk through it after you accept my offer. So the first walkthrough is done once people agree to terms. That's the way that real estate is happening now.
Now, you are cutting some employees, and I'm sure these have been really tough decisions. 7% of employees, cutting 7% of employees, 41% of people going on furlough. How are you navigating this, and do you think that's the worst it's going to get?
Well, I certainly hope so. we cut much deeper than our demand because we wanted to offer security to the people who are still here. So everybody at Redfin is fairly busy now. And our goal is just to bring all the others back. Everyone who went on furlough is supposed to come back on September 1st. We'd like to be able to bring them back earlier. We're going to work as hard as we can to do that. But I think that the federal employment insurance that just passed a couple of weeks ago that gives people an extra $2,400 just made it hard to hold on to people, because about 3/4 of our workforce will earn more on unemployment than we could pay them. So it's been a really rough month for almost every business serving consumers. But I think housing demand will be back, and then all our people will be back.
Do you think the housing market will be fundamentally changed after this?
What we've been telling our employees is that the future has arrived early, and that all the technology investments we've made now favor Redfin. But I think the other dimension to your question is just about the housing market more fundamentally. And there are just structural reasons that I think we'll go back to a seller's market. The US has been so screwed up in its ability to build houses. There's NIMBYism and zoning laws, and we're running out of land in the major urban centers. And so there are people who've been waiting 5 or 6 years to be able to afford a place. And if housing prices come down a little bit over the next 6 months, it won't be the worst thing that came out of this pandemic.
So do you think prices are going to come down and stay down, or they're going to go back up? What does it mean for pricing?
Prices are definitely coming down. People's 401ks have been smoked. So the stock market has had at least a minor correction. At one point, it was a steep correction. And then you have all this unemployment, which is forcing inventory onto the market, at least temporarily. So I just have to believe that home prices are coming down. If you look at the median list price, it's down about 5%. So people are asking for less, and then bidding wars are obviously less common.
Glenn Kelman, the CEO of Redfin there. Coming up, we're going to talk about Amazon's continued hiring spree as delivery numbers skyrocket with people quarantined at home. We're also going to take you to the White House as soon as that daily press conference begins. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Amazon hiring another 75,000 workers as demand for products being sent to homes continues to skyrocket. This in addition to 100,000 workers Amazon said it would hire a couple of weeks ago. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Matt Day, who covers Amazon from Seattle. Matt, what's interesting about these workers and the folks who are applying for these jobs, these are all kinds of workers, not your typical sort of warehouse workers, folks who've lost jobs, some who normally have sort of white-collar jobs as well as blue-collar jobs. Talk to us about who these people are and what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. Small business owners, accountants, folks who've been in delivery driving or warehouse work before. The gamut. I'm not sure there's a lot of companies that could digest or even hire 100,000 people in just a few weeks, as you said, but Amazon's done that, and they're certainly turning on the tap for more. 175,000 over whatever it would be 8 weeks would be pretty unprecedented for them, but it definitely seems, in contrast to some of their usual seasonal hiring, that they're pulling in folks from kind of all walks of life, as you said.
Meantime, the company is continuing to face controversy. It's on the front page of newspapers, it's fodder for comedy show hosts, just how Amazon is treating its workers. There's been a lot of worker unrest. The company is fighting, safety issues across the country and around the world where workers are continuing to test positive. Some of these warehouses being shut down. This is kind of a PR nightmare for Amazon when you would think this could be Amazon's time to shine, given that it's one of the only ways to get the stuff that we need. Amazon just launched a new round of commercials with workers wearing masks this time. The last round of commercials didn't get so much positive feedback because the workers in those commercials weren't wearing masks. Now they are wearing masks, and I'm still seeing comments on social media that, this is Amazon pretending to care about its workers. Talk to us just about the PR nightmare that Amazon is facing right now.
So I think some of this snuck up on Amazon. They're not used to talking a whole lot about their warehouse workers. Like we've seen, negative stories for years and years about conditions in their buildings. But I think as their own workers started getting sick, they weren't really prepared for kind of the degree of the backlash and frankly the degree of fear among their own employees. Right, folks have been calling us, been calling other news outlets to raise concerns that maybe in a different time they would have just kept quiet about. So I think that this definitely snuck up on Amazon, and you've certainly seen their PR machine ramp up. Just in the last few weeks here, they've got a daily blog going now, kind of outlining safety measures as they roll them out with evolving, federal and WHO guidance. They've got that commercial series you mentioned. Jeff Bezos even went and visited one of these things in sort of an Instagram-ready moment. So they definitely seem to be belatedly catching up and realizing that, to avoid some of these negative headlines, they've got to put their own face forward.
Amazon is launching new safety measures, deep cleaning at warehouses, temperature checks. They are paying workers $2 an hour more temporarily. Is any of what Amazon has been doing more recently quelled some of these worker concerns?
I think it's starting to check those boxes. Masks in warehouses, those shipments started to arrive last week. That was a big step. Temperature checks was something that in areas dealing with COVID-19 outbreaks that health authorities have been recommending for more than a month now. Amazon's finally sort of caught up there. So I think they're starting to catch up to some of the worker complaints. But, I think you've seen across industries, workers who are on the front lines and still being asked to come into work, grocery clerks, postal workers, UPS drivers. There's always going to be that kind of fear when you're out there, going about your day-to-day routine during this pandemic. And I suspect that workers will always say their employer rather could do a little more to keep them safe.
All right, Bloomberg's Matt Day will be back with you as this situation continues to develop. Thanks so much for that update. Meantime, video streaming is soaring, and that is true perhaps even more so on YouTube, where traffic is up 75%. Chief Product Officer Neil Mohan and I sat down at the end of last week to talk about activity on the platform, what the company is doing to fight misinformation. Take a listen to what he had to say.
There has been an increase in traffic, as you can imagine, and there's been a couple of things that I think are interesting to note. And so, YouTube in particular has always had sort of slightly different patterns on weekdays versus weekends, for example. And so over weekends, you can imagine that our consumption is much more spread out during the day. And on weekdays, of course, it concentrates, after work hours. And so we're seeing much more sort of distributed content consumption. Overall usage of the platform, of course, is up. And it's up, interestingly, in a couple of particular areas to note. So one of the biggest and in a big area of focus of mine and our teams is around kind of authoritative content, news like yourself, et cetera, sort of people trying to consume as much information around this crisis, of course, medically related information, but also just general news, economic news, et cetera. It's top of mind for everybody. And we've seen kind of over recent weeks, that type of content on our platform grow in terms of consumption 75% year on year. So substantial increase in people consuming hard news on YouTube, lots of it related to this crisis.
What changes have you made to adjust for that spike in traffic, internally and just in terms of policy as well?
Sure. So, I'll put that in two buckets. I mean, the first is, obviously our platform is global. This crisis is a global crisis, unfortunately. And so, we want to make sure that we're delivering the content to all of our users across the world. The good news is that our systems and everything that we've put in place over the course of the last several years has been able to scale. One thing that we've done to working with governments and other people who want to make sure, of course, that we're delivering our service in an uninterrupted fashion, is we've defaulted delivery to standard definition. Of course, users can choose, higher definition if they want to, but that's a default setting that we've done globally, and that's in place for the next, a few weeks, 30 days, and of course, we'll continue to visit that as this continues. Probably the biggest area of focus for us, though, of course, has been building on what has been a really big effort for us over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, which is this recognition of our platform as a global platform in terms of our responsibility to all of our users, content creators, et cetera. And that's particularly around this crisis, when users are looking for information, making sure that we're delivering very high quality, relevant, credible information. Again, stuff that is content that's being produced by news sources, but also from medical outlets. And so a lot of what you've seen on YouTube, and you may have seen this in your own experience, when people are searching for things like coronavirus or COVID-19, we are delivering authoritatively ranked results, again, coming from news, coming from medical outfits. We've made a number of changes to our home feed. So when the billions of users using YouTube open up the app for the first time, there is a COVID-19 news shelf that runs across the top. And we will also serve content directly from organizations like the World Health Organization, the CDC here in the US, and other national health authorities across the world, so that every single user, literally when they open up the app, has the latest and most credible information around this crisis.
Videos from doctors have been getting a ton of views on YouTube, and I'm wondering, can your systems actually determine if a doctor is providing accurate information or not, like medically accurate advice?
Yeah, so we have this notion of identifying content that comes from what we deem to be an authoritative source on a topic, and I mentioned this in the context of news publications, of course, and so we have a scoring mechanism for channels that we deem to be authoritative in nature, that have a track record of delivering content that is credible, relevant, et cetera. And for medical information in particular, and the way that we determine that is we use a number of signals, including signals from Google News, et cetera. And we have evaluators spread out across the world who basically give us their opinions on these videos based on kind of this published set of guidelines that we have. And we use all of those signals, including these opinions, to determine a score for a channel in terms of whether it's authoritative or not. And we do the same thing for medically oriented channels. So there's a big creator, for example, named Dr. Mike on our channel, on our platform, and we'll use that same methodology, except in terms of the raters that are evaluating that content, we will actually work directly with medical doctors who can discern between information that might seem authoritative in nature, but is inaccurate from a medical standpoint. And so we will incorporate their expertise into determining whether that channel is authoritative in nature, and only if it meets that bar will we rank it highly in our search results or recommend it to our users when they're watching content of this nature.
State officials have warned hospitals about this hashtag #FilmYourHospital social media campaign and efforts to suggest the virus is a hoax. Many videos with that hashtag, you can find them on YouTube right now. How are you responding to this?
From the beginning of this crisis, and actually put into place over the last couple of years, we've had explicit policies around misinformation that is of the medical realm. So any information that might be discouraging people from seeking timely medical care, that might be pushing people towards cures that might be harmful, et cetera, is kind of a broad rubric that we apply to strike videos from our platform. And so in the case of COVID-19, we've extended that, the enforcement underneath that policy rubric to include things like videos that might encourage people to flout stay-at-home orders, for example, that are coming from their county and state governments. And also content that might be spreading misinformation around this crisis, like this crisis is not as big as it seems to be, those types of things. Recently, we updated our guidelines around a particular conspiracy that you may have heard of around 5G being connected to COVID-19. And so we're remaining as vigilant as possible. We're removing content that's a clear policy violation, and we are actively demoting content that might not be a policy violation, but sort of brushes up against sort of harmful misinformation.
Neil Mohan there, Chief Product Officer at YouTube. Coming up, how companies can secure and monitor their remote workforce in the time of this pandemic. We're going to talk to the CEO of Splunk next. This is Bloomberg. With so many employees working from home, Splunk, a company with its data to everything platform, is trying to make this transition easier for companies and their employees. Joining me now, the CEO of Splunk, Doug Merritt. Doug, talk to us a little bit about how your technology works and how it's being used right now and used differently than it normally is used with so many folks working from home.
Absolutely. So we're a big data platform. Our motto is that we aim to bring data to every question, decision, and action. And particularly in this time frame, we really believe that data can save lives. We gather data from a huge array of sources and find ways to make sense of it. Right now, as a simple example for anyone out there, we've got a whole bunch of public-facing dashboards from that help articulate what's going on with COVID-19. There's over 120,000 users that are interacting with these. Even more importantly, we're working with private and public organizations who touch every angle of this crisis to help with very tactical things like ensuring that the virtual workers can go virtual and that they've got secure connections when they go virtual, to more foundational work with medical suppliers, hospital systems, logistics and transportation companies, manufacturers, all the fun federal, state, and local agencies that surround these, so that they can get visibility on the different aspects of not just what their employees are doing safely in a virtual environment or safely in an essential work environment, but so that they can get that insight that data brings that will help drive the right actions, fundamental decisions to save lives in this crazy time that we're in right now.
So are you saying that all this data was there and the U.S. government didn't act on it or didn't know how to find it or analyze it?
Yeah, I think there are two things going on simultaneously. When you look at the huge array of organizations that would be involved in something like a pandemic, even at the federal level, there's 10, 15 different distinct organizations that would touch a pandemic. And one aspect is, are they effective in driving a fulsome set of data for their own unique needs? Health and Human Services, CDC, FDA, FEMA as examples. Then the second piece, which is, and then they've got some degree of digitization happening, but not always as much as they would want to or need to. And then the second, even more thorny issue is those data repositories are isolated, which is the case with so many of the Splunk use cases that we drive. And how do you do an effective job of synthesizing the data, correlating and finding patterns across that data? Because the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, as one of those throwaway sayings goes. And for simple example, if we can just imagine a hospital that through heroic effort has actually got adequate doctors, nurses, technicians, beds, ventilators, PPE, everything they need, but they're missing cotton swabs, all of a sudden they're in a very difficult situation. So it really comes back to huge amounts of data available, a lot of it misunderstood, a lot of it dark, but if you can surface it effectively, it saves lives and helps organizations with data-driven leadership.
Now, meantime, even though your technology might be particularly useful right now, we have an economy in a recession. We're seeing layoffs happening across the board. Is this impacting demand for your products? Are you having trouble making new sales?
You know, I think one of the things that we're really seeing right now is a big difference between what a digitized set of organizations can do. In this case, let's say the digitized private sector versus a less digitized sector. In this case, public sector that is still going through a lot of machinations to become digitized. When we look at someone like Amazon and Walmart and Costco, these are examples of companies that have emerged as essential and critical services. Amazon and Walmart alone, as you guys have been reporting, are trying to ramp up 100,000 new employees, never mind what they have to do to stock and distribute their entire catalog. And the difference is they're data-first digital businesses which is in contrast to a lot of organizations that aren't. Luckily, all three of those are customers. We've got 20,000 customers around the globe. We're seeing very strong engagement with those customers because their volume of data and the visibility they need around data is only going up, which Splunk helps them with. And we've even seen some brand new customers. A couple of states have come online in the past 3 or 4 weeks.
All right.
Who are trying to ramp their data usage.
Doug, we'll have to leave it there.
Before I begin, I'd like to.
We'll have to leave it there. Doug, the president is just out. Let's listen in.
To the people all across our great South who have endured deadly tornadoes and other severe weather in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. My administration will do everything possible to help those communities get back on their feet. We're speaking with the governors and representatives. FEMA's already on its way, and they got there as soon as we heard the word. I said, get out there. So FEMA's there, and you know the great job that FEMA does. It's really something very special. So we just want to say warmest condolences, and we're with you all the way. It's a tough deal. That was a bad level 5. That was a bad group. That's as high as it gets. It was a bad grouping of tornadoes, something that's something incredible. The power, the horrible, destructive power. America is continuing to make critical progress in our war against the virus. Over the weekend, the number of daily new infections remained flat, nationwide flat. Hospitalizations are slowing in hotspots like New York, New Jersey, Michigan, and Louisiana. This is clear evidence that our aggressive strategy to combat the virus is working and that Americans are following the guidelines. It's been incredible what they've done. You looked at the charts, and the charts are, and the models from early on predictions where 100 and 120,000 people looked like if they did well, they were going to unfortunately perish. And we're going to be hopefully way, way below that number. So that will be a sign of people doing things right, but it's still just a horrible thing all over the world, 184 countries. This is all a tribute to our wonderful healthcare advisors and experts who have been with us right from the beginning. We appreciate it so much. In fact, Dr. Fauci's here. Maybe I could ask Tony to say a few words before we go any further. Thank you very much. Tony, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of things, and then I just want to make a comment about something that happened yesterday. You're going to hear from Dr. Birx soon about the numbers that we've been talking about, how things are starting to balance off. And I think the more as we go by each day, I think we're going to see, and again, I never like to get ahead of myself or of Dr. Birx, but it looks like even though we've had a really bad week last week, remember when I was speaking to you before, I was saying this was really a bad week. There's still going to be a lot of deaths, but we're starting to see in some areas now that kind of flattening, particularly in a place that was a hot spot like New York. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I had a really very, very productive conversation with the Congressional Black Caucus this morning for about an hour, and they really wanted to know what exactly are we going to be doing in the immediate as well as the long range about the health disparities and the discrepancies both in infection and in poor outcome in the minorities in general, but specifically African American. And I mean, I made it very clear to them that what we have to do is focus on getting the resources where the vulnerable are to be able to get testing done, to be able to get the appropriate identification where proper and where appropriate to isolate and contact trace if we can, but also to help mitigate in a community that is suffering and suffering much more disproportionately. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. The other point I wanted to make is that I had an interview yesterday that I was asked a hypothetical question. And hypothetical questions sometimes can get you into some difficulty because it's what would have or could have. The nature of the hypothetical question was if, in fact, we had mitigated earlier, could lives have been saved? And the answer to my question was, as I always do, and I'm doing right now, perfectly honestly, say, yes. I mean, obviously, if mitigation helps, I've been up here many times telling you that mitigation works. So if mitigation works,
and you instigate it and you initiate it earlier, you will probably have saved more lives. If you initiated it later, you probably would have lost more lives. You initiated at a certain time. That was taken as a way that maybe somehow something was at fault here. So let me tell you from my experience, and I can only speak from my own experience, is that we had been talking before any meetings that we had about the pros and the cons, the effectiveness or not of strong mitigations. So discussions were going on mostly among the medical people about what that would mean. The first and only time that Dr. Birx and I went in and formally made a recommendation to the president to actually have a, quote, shutdown in the sense of not really shutdown, but to really have strong mitigation. We discussed it. Obviously, there would be concern by some that, in fact, that might have some negative consequences. Nonetheless, the president listened to the recommendation and went to the mitigation. The next second time that I went with Dr. Birx into the president and said, 15 days are not enough. We need to go 30 days. Obviously, there were people who had a problem with that because of the potential secondary effects. Nonetheless, at that time, the president went with the health recommendations, and we extended it another 30 days. So I can only tell you what I know and what my recommendations were. But clearly, as happens all the time, there were interpretations of that response to a hypothetical question that I just thought it would be very nice for me to clarify because I didn't have the chance to clarify. Thank you. Excuse me? The date. You know, to be honest with you, I don't even remember what the date was. But I can just tell you the first and only time that I went in and said we should do mitigation strongly, the response was, yes, we'll do it.
And what did you do? Is that the travel restrictions?
No, the travel restriction is separate. That was whether or not we wanted to go into a mitigation stage of 15 days of mitigation. The travel was another recommendation when we went in and said...
Dr. Anthony Fauci there clarifying some comments he made about 24 hours ago about mitigation, saying that, sure, hypothetically, if mitigation efforts had been implemented earlier, lives could have been saved, but that it was purely a hypothetical question. So touching on that controversy there.